Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is Corey Michael Sanchez. This is an amazing show teaching you how to navigate the murky waters of GDPR. My company is Mojo Global. Check us out at mojoglobal.com. And I'm here with leading expert in GDPR, Suzanne Dibble, and she's an award-winning business lawyer. And what I love is that she has an amazing way of really making it simple on knowing what to do with GDPR, because there's a lot of misinformation that's out there, and she really dispels a lot of that, which is why we're having this this great interview today. So Suzanne, thanks for joining us. Let me give you a little background and we'll on her, and then we'll have her take it over. But she's a multi-award winning business lawyer. She works with a lot of multinationals on data protection. And she has been really out there. She's got a Facebook group of well over 30,000 people, entrepreneurs, business owners all over the world that are interested in GDPR. She's managed a group-wide data protection project. She's been nominated in a Virgin nomination for Solicitor of the Year award, which is a big deal. So she's got some really big chops when it comes to obviously her attorney background, her law background, and also when it comes to GDPR and business and helping entrepreneurs really understand what you need to do and how to do that. So Suzanne, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. You're my sixth interview of the day. So with GDPR coming into force on Friday, it's proving to be a popular subject, which, as I was just saying to you, as a lawyer, I'm really excited about, because not often do we get new laws that people are actually interested in. So although you say it is a murky area, which I completely agree with, it's in a way interesting that there isn't a black and white, and that we do have to have these discussions about, well, what does that actually mean? Which, well, I say it's interesting. People in my small businesses in my group are probably like, for goodness sake, can't they just tell us exactly what to do? But that isn't really the point of the legislation, and we'll talk about that more, I'm sure.
Well, if you think about it, I mean, we're kind of navigating some unknown waters, right? Because we're talking about data, and the internet isn't really that old, and questions of people's data, it's, I mean, before, going back like hundreds of years, you would be notated on when you were born, right? And then it would be notated when you were died, maybe, and that's the kind of the data people would have on you, right? And so
exactly,
yeah, now we're in a data. I mean, there's all this stuff about Facebook. How much information are they collecting? Cookies, right? How much do they know? And so this is interesting, because it's like groundbreaking that this is even coming out, but I think it's a necessary thing because it needs to be addressed. And I love that Europe is really kind of a front runner in addressing this. United States, where I'm from, kind of a little more cavalier with data. So I like to see that Europe really is architecting some of these things, which is really fabulous. So let's talk about what is GDPR in kind of plain English.
Essentially, it's a law that protects people. In the last 20 years, since we had our last data protection law in Europe, we're processing data in ways that were unimaginable 20 years ago. And it's really, GDPR is the law catching up with what we're doing with data. And the fact that there are these increased sanctions, the maximum fine is 20 million euros or 4% of your global turnover, which for Facebook, by the way, if Facebook were to be fined the maximum amount, it would be $109 billion based on its last year's turnover. So it shows the seriousness with which certainly European authorities are treating the protection of people's data. And that's only right, because as The Economist said, data is now the world's most valuable asset. It's not oil anymore, it's data. And as data subjects, we need to know that the companies that we're giving our data to, because we need to, because that's how the world works these days, that data is being properly protected. So that's what GDPR is all about. It is about raising the standard of protection for data. It's about being really transparent and upfront to people about what you're doing with their data. It's about making sure that there's sufficient security in place. It's about making sure you don't take more data than's necessary. It's about deleting data when you don't need it. It's about essentially protecting data, but there are many facets to it, and I think that's what people find the murky grounds. It's a complex regulation. It doesn't just apply to email marketing, although that's what we tend to talk about it mainly in the context of, but it affects every bit of your business. Whatever bit of your business you collect data in, it affects it. So it's a really wide-ranging and complex regulation. But of course, we're here today to really talk about it in the context of internet marketing, and particularly email marketing, and maybe a bit of Facebook stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And, because that's, I think, what's relevant to a lot of people. Obviously, I think there's some things, there are provisions for bigger companies, right? And obviously companies that have employees in the EU. So that's some considerations that we'll just leave for another day, if you want to fill your head with some of that. But for today, we're going to talk about internet marketing, websites, and what needs to happen. So there's always talk about compliance, right? I've heard a lot of speak about compliance. You might agree with this. It's hard to kind of define that. It's like a wiggly thing. Maybe it doesn't even exist, right? So what does a business really need to do to become compliant, or as close to it as possible?
Okay. So the first thing you need to do is really understand your data flows in terms of where your data is coming from, what data you hold. And when I say data, I mean personal data. And that's data that identifies a living individual. So you need to understand where it's coming from, what you're doing with it, what you've told people you're doing with it, and who you are sending it to and how it's being protected. So the very first step is a data inventory of what data you hold. Actually, I tell a lie. Before that, it's working out whether GDPR actually applies to you or not. So we'll just cover that because I know you've got an international audience. So if businesses are established within the EU, then GDPR applies in totality to all of the personal data, whether that's in the EU or outside of the EU. If you're established outside of the EU, then GDPR only applies if you are processing data of people within the EU to the extent that you're intending to offer them goods and services, whether they're free or not, or if you're monitoring their behaviour. So if you have people on your email list because you're intending to offer them goods and services, then you're caught. If you're doing Facebook ads into the EU, then you're caught. Okay, but just, the mere fact of having a website that's available to people from the EU doesn't necessarily mean that GDPR applies. Okay, but if you've got a fair amount of people on your email list, then suffice to say it applies. Okay, but so if you're a very local business in the States, the fact that you've got a website that people could just stumble across doesn't necessarily mean that GDPR would apply to you. But people who are doing internet marketing, then chances are it's probably going to apply.
Okay, so like if you're doing advertisement, let's say, and you're doing Facebook advertisement, and you're saying, well, I'm looking for English speakers in the United States and the UK and Australia, you would you would need to definitely come under the GDPR, right?
Yeah, if you're processing the personal data, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
good. So, all right. So let's say you are, right?
Yeah.
And you need to update your privacy policy and make sure
So absolutely. So first step, get really, really comfortable with what data you've got, because you can't write your privacy policy until you've done that job. Because in your privacy policy, you're basically going to explain where you've got your data from, what you're doing with it, for what purpose, and what's your lawful ground of processing. Now, the lawful ground of processing is where people come a bit unstuck, and this is what is the really murky area. And you've probably heard that people are talking about consent. Do I need to reconsent my lists? They're talking about this thing called legitimate interest, and it's people have got a little bit confused about what all that means. So basically, if you're processing personal data, there are 6 lawful grounds of processing that data. And if you don't have a lawful ground of processing, then it's illegal to process that data. Okay. And consent is one of those grounds. Legitimate interest is another of those grounds. There's also a contractual ground, a legal ground, a public interest ground, and a necessary for the vital interests of a data subject. So the most common ones that we're dealing with, consent and legitimate interest. So what's legitimate interest all about? Because people will be really happy if I say you don't need to get consent for sending email marketing to people in Europe, right? So legitimate interest is where you have a legitimate interest, which we do in sending marketing, and then you balance that with the rights and interests of the data subject. So it's like we're taking responsibility for thinking about the rights and subjects of the data subject. And typically it'll be appropriate where there's a pre-existing relationship between you and the data subject. So the person who's giving you the data is the data subject. So if you're my customer, then I can, under legitimate interest, send you marketing emails because we've got that relationship already. And you probably quite like to hear from me. If I'm doing a great job of delivering you, the services, then you'll love to hear from me. Okay, so in those circumstances, then chances are you could rely on legitimate interests and you don't need consent. Yeah, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, cool. The other ground, consent, it's a higher consent standard than we used to have, which is the thing that's getting people confused. Okay, because what we used to be able to do, and I know this is all new for you in the States, but we've had consent rules before. It's now they're being upgraded almost. So to be a legitimate form of consent now, it's things like you can't have opt-outs, you can't have pre-ticked boxes, you've got to be really clear, use really clear language about what you're sending people. So for example, now going forwards, you can't say, sign up here for my lead magnet, full stop, and then just happen to send them emails, okay, marketing emails on the back of it, which we all do, don't we? I mean, that's the whole point of doing the lead magnet in the first place, is because you want to be able to tell them about your amazing services and whatever else. So we now have to be a lot more upfront and transparent about that, and potentially get a tick in a tick box to say, yes, not only do I want that lead magnet, I also want to get your marketing emails. Okay. Yep. Now there are kind of ways around it. Certainly I think one of them would be if you say, sign up here for my newsletter, and somewhere in that page you'll tell them what that newsletter includes, and the newsletter might include details of offers, promotions, etc. Mm-hmm. Sign up here for my newsletter and get the free report. Okay. Now, in that case, I don't think you'd need a tick box, because you're clearly telling people what they're signing up for, and you're incentivizing the sign up by giving them the free report. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. So you see, a lot of this is, it's kind of, it sounds like semantics, and to some extent it is, but the more upfront and transparent you can be with people about what you're doing with the data, the better. Okay.
So so you have a free opt-in for a free report. It's okay to advertise it and not have to get that little check mark thing and just send them a free report. But if you're going to send them more offers on other products and services, you need to have that available so they can click the box and then hit submit. Right?
Yeah. But what I'm saying is that if you don't want to do that for some reason, if you don't want to have that tick box, or you can't, because I know a lot of people in my group, their software just won't allow them to put the tick box there at the moment.
Sure.
So then you could switch it round on its head. So you're actually saying, sign up for our newsletter is a way of saying it's a mixture of value-based emails and offers. Mm-hmm. So you're saying, sign up for the newsletter, and as a reward for doing that, we'll send you this amazing free report. So you're kind of turning it on its head so that you don't necessarily need that tick box.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah? Totally makes sense. Okay, perfect. Let's talk about logging of consent, right? So let's say that you actually do have a tick box that says, hey, you have permission to, I sign off on your privacy policy and I give you permission to follow up with me with other products and services. Now, I've been hearing this kind of thing, like, do you actually have to log the information on consent, or is it just enough to have a solution in place where it shows, well, hey, I have this thing where people have to literally check it and then to move on, right?
Yeah. No, you do need records of the consent. And again, there's no detailed guidance as to what that actually means, but I would say it means that you know where it's come from, so what opt-in form that was, and you'd need to know what the opt-in form said. If you had a link to your privacy policy, which you should do at the point of collection of data on the lead magnet, so you'd have a link saying, we process your data in accordance with our privacy policy, link through to the privacy policy. And you would have the time and the date that they consented to that. So they're the kind of records that you need to keep, so that if anyone emails you in the future and says, you're spamming me, I didn't consent to this, you can look at those records and say, well, actually, on the 7th of February at 2 a.m., you opted in for my X, and as part of that, it said that you were getting the newsletter, for example. That's the kind of level of record that you need to have.
Okay. All right. Stellar. Good to know.
And I think, some software does that and some doesn't. I mean, I use Infusionsoft, so I can only talk for Infusionsoft, but certainly I feel that their record keeping capacity in Infusionsoft is sufficient to meet the obligations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of autoresponders actually do that, date and time stamp it as well. So that's good. They just don't necessarily say, I sign off to this privacy policy, right? Which I think is something that,
No, so what you'd need to do on that is you're not going to be changing your privacy policy that often. So what I'd do is literally just go old school and literally print one out and write on it the date that the privacy policy comes into effect, handwrite it, put it in a cabinet in a folder of privacy policies, and then when you replace it, write on the old one the date that you replace it, and then put the next one there, so that literally you can look through that file and say, okay, this one was in place at that time. That's the data that they had. Okay,
perfect. Totally makes sense. That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was quite a simple solution.
Yeah, that's very nice. Okay, I like it. Taking it old school. That's very nice. Let's talk about the dangers of GDPR, right? We talked about the fines, right? Which potentially massive, but that's, if we're talking Facebook, right? We're small businesses. I mean, what are the real dangers of GDPR? I mean, are there, is it something where I should just try, how much attempts do I need to do to have in place to make this happen?
Sure.
What are the dangers?
Okay, so the first thing to know is that Europe does not have this vast data protection police force that are going to go around the world and make sure that everyone is 100% compliant. The real risks come from people complaining about you. So in my view, there's two things. They can complain to regulatory authorities about you, but now they can also bring direct action against you. They can sue you effectively. Now someone would have to be pretty disgruntled to go to the time, effort and expense of bringing their own legal claim. So chances are it's more likely that they would complain to the regulator. And I think that the chances of that are increasing as customers are becoming more savvy about their data protection rights. So the risk is that a customer complains, the regulatory authority would investigate, but the chance of actually getting a fine is very low. You have to be doing something pretty bad with a lot of data for there to be even a prospect of a fine. So really, the risks, in my view, the hassle and the uncertainty of a customer complaining, brand damage, and certainly if it's big enough, there's potential for class actions. But I just can't imagine. That's just like off the scale for the kind of things that we internet marketers are doing with the data. So it's all a risk analysis in my view. My job is to tell people what the law says, or try to, because it's quite hard to interpret what they actually mean when you're translating that into the practicalities of running a business. I say what the law says, and then it's really for the businesses to take a commercial view as to, okay, well, that's what I should be doing, and then working out whether that is actually what they're. Not that I would ever, suggest that anybody should break the law, but at the end of the day, it's not everybody. We have data protection laws at the moment. Not everybody is compliant. In fact, many businesses are far from compliant, and nothing has ever happened about that. Okay, so I think you've got to take a bit of a risk analysis approach to it as well.
Yeah, I think it comes down to peace of mind, right? Because especially in internet marketing, you're more visible, right?
Yeah.
If you're a consultant and you do things kind of like really relationship style, all right, probably not a big deal. But if you're marketing out there and you're internet marketing and you sell products out there, right? The way I look at it is like, imagine a scenario where like you offer a good product or service. Not everybody has, sometimes you don't always get the best of clients, right? And if they find a little chink in the armor for GDPR, then that puts you at risk for kinds of things.
And actually not just clients, but competitors as well. Competitors can try and catch you out and cause problems for you.
Yeah.
So you're right. It is probably peace of mind rather than anything else. And actually, when you look at the things that you need to do, it's probably not that much. It's good practice, and it's the way that data protection law is heading anyway. And for those of the businesses that embrace it up front, I think there's potentially a competitive advantage to doing that. Certainly I, as a data subject and someone who's giving my data to companies, if they show me that they respect that data, that they're protecting that data, then I'm very happy about that. So I think that there's a lot of good practice in it anyway, regardless of the potential sanctions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, perfect. Because you don't want it to slow you down, right? And so like, and if like for a lot of our folks, we have a lot of United States traffic, but if you've got even a small percentage of European traffic, best to cover your butt, right? And just make sure maybe that you only show things to European traffic when it applies, right? Like the right kind of sign-offs and all that stuff. So
yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think in terms of internet, there's a great blog post actually that is in my group. Optimized Press put it together, and we're using my materials, but it's a really comprehensive but simple read about things like how to do your opt-in forms, whether you need to reconsent, things like that. So that's definitely worth having a read of. But essentially with internet marketing, really, if all you remember is just be really upfront about what you're doing with the data, even if you don't get the exact technicalities right and you didn't have quite the right tick box, then that will get you more than 50% of the way there. Just be upfront. If that's all you do, then that's a really good start. Be just super clear and upfront about what you're doing with the data.
Yeah, and the thing I think to remember is that, right, you've got company A and who's taken some steps to be compliant. You got company B that really has done nothing, right? It's like who are the regulators going to come after? I think it's a very simple answer, right? They're going to go after people that have like completely avoided and not done anything.
Exactly.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Well, so this is good, and you have solutions, which I love because people, it's like people hear some information, education, great. But when rubber meets the road, like you actually have to put in place some things, and so I know you have some of that. So, love for you to
there's
talk about that.
a few things that things that people have to put in place. One, we've already touched on, the privacy notice. The reason is that GDPR says there's about 10 things that you need to include in there, so everyone will need a new privacy notice. That's one document that needs to go in place. The other is, if you haven't already got a cookie policy, then really good idea to get one of those in place. It hasn't actually changed that much in terms of what you need to say in it, but certainly if you haven't got one, then get one. The other thing to think about is, this is a bit too in-depth for this interview, but there is a big issue around data controllers and data processors. So if you are a data controller, i.e. you're the owner of the business and you have the list of data, so you own the email list, if you use people to process that data in any way, then there's a whole set of obligations around that relationship. So if I'm using a virtual assistant, for example, to send out my emails or do things with my email data, then she is a processor for me. And if you think about it logically, there's all these protections around what the data controller does with the data, i.e. me as the owner of that list. Mm-hmm. There's all these protections here. It wouldn't make much sense if I could then transfer that data to somebody else who's going to process it for me and do things with it without a similar level of protection. And similarly, if this processor here passes that on to a sub-processor, then there has to be that similar level of protection around that. Mm. So there's also and I'm not going to go into the detail of this, but if that does apply to you, then I suggest you go into my group. There's loads of free resources on that and videos and checklists and things about that. But what you would need to put in place there is a processor agreement. So for everybody who processes your data, and certainly if you're talking about people from the States, remember we're only talking about European data, but to the extent that they do that, it would need the same protection and you would need to put in place a processor agreement. So that's another document, and if we're just talking about legal documents that people need here, that's another key one that people are likely to need. But we don't talk about that very often on internet marketing shows, so that's probably like freaks everyone completely out. They're like, oh my goodness, it's not a tick box. What's this all about? So so that is an issue. And if you are a processor within the States, you might be getting people from the EU sending you processor agreements and asking you to sign that. So it'd be a good idea if you knew what that was all about. There's also, we've got to consider the transfer of data internationally. There's a whole area around that as well, which again, too complex for the length of this interview. But all of these documents, these legal documents, there's probably about 5 key ones, I'd say. they're all in a template pack that I put together, because I thought, right, how can I affordably help small business owners who don't have the budget to go and pay thousands to a lawyer for one-to-one consulting? So that's all in a template pack. Then there's loads of notes and videos about how you fill them in and etc. So if people are thinking, okay, well, it's all very well, like you say, knowing the theory and the law, but what do I actually do next? People can go and check that out. It's in the pinned post in my Facebook group, which is GDPR for Online Entrepreneurs. I'm sure you'll give people that link.
Yep.
Then people can check that out. And that will help you become GDPR compliant. Now, obviously, there's probably other laws, depending on where you are, that will impact on various things you do. My pack does not cover that. It's not like a one-stop, this will save you in every legal circumstance shop. It's purely to help you become GDPR compliant.
Perfect.
But yeah, I mean, that's, I think, you know, even if businesses, if internet marketers put the privacy notice in place and sorted out their opt-in forms, that would be a really good start. If they could also master the processor agreement side of things and the international data transfer side of things, that would be a bonus. But certainly phase one, privacy notice, data inventory, privacy notice, cookie policy, those three things will stand you in really good stead. Love
it. Perfect. Suzanne, this is excellent. Thank you so much. Really dispelling a lot of the myths out there about GDPR. So we have a link you can go to, and we'll also link to the Facebook group as well. But the link is bemojo.com, bemojo.com/GDPR-CP, and that stands for Compliance Pack. So if you're really interested in learning more about that, just go there. She's got some excellent training that you can listen in on. She walks you through exactly what you need document-wise. It's really awesome. So bemojo.com/GDPR-CP. And thanks so much, Suzanne. This has been really awesome. And
no worries. I have to say, this has probably been my lowest energy interview ever, but after like 7 interviews, and it's now 10 o'clock in the nighttime here. So my apologies. I'm normally much more bubbly than this. So it's like the end of a very long day. So I hope that at the very least I've cleared a few things up and you know, given a sensible, balanced approach to it and told people that they don't need to panic.
No, you did a fabulous job. And I think, you know, and the information you gave is really stellar, and it's a great start, but it really does clear up a lot of things for a lot of people. So everybody relax, breathe in, breathe out, yeah. And just go make sure you get the right documents in place and follow the details in here, and you'll be off to the right start. So
exactly.
Right on. All right. Thank you, Suzanne. Anything else before we leave?
No, I don't know whether it will apply to many people listening, but just to highlight it, just in case, is that some US companies will need to appoint a representative within the EU. So not everyone will, and it's not completely to do with the size of the company. So do go and there's a video and a guidance note on that in my Facebook group. It's free. So, you know, if you are more than, say, a one-man band, I'd go and check that out and see whether it applies to you, because you might need to do that, which is a right pain in the backside. But, you know, and again, it's a risk analysis as to whether you do it or not. But just want to highlight that, because, again, not many people in the US are talking about that at the moment. And I think that it's just an area that needs to be, people just need to look at. It might be that it's a no, in which case, great. But just in case, I want to just highlight that.
Excellent. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is be informed, right? So like be informed about kind of what you need to do. So watching this training, watching this video is like a really important piece of that, but like taking the next steps. Right. And the cowboy days of like data and internet are, you can wait.
Yeah, well, I'm sure. I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? We're still going to get the spammers from China and places like that, you know, because they're impossible to shut down. That's the frustrating part of it, really. But yeah, I think people are going to have to really tidy up their practices and start, you know, the ICO and other European authorities have said this is not a legislative box ticking exercise. It's about organizations really putting privacy at the heart of the organization and truly respecting people's data, rather than just thinking about it as, oh, goodness me, I've got to apply with this stupid law and let's tick these boxes. You know, it is really about putting yourself in the shoes of that person and thinking, how would I want my own data to be treated?
Yep. Perfect. Totally makes sense. All right, thank you. Thank you so much for educating and training our folks on that. Once
You're
again,
very welcome.
Yeah, thank you. bmojo.com/GDPR CP, that stands for Compliance Pack. All right, everybody, go out there, take some steps forward, and hopefully this will help clear up a lot of the myths out there. So thanks so much for Suzanne, once again, for being here.
You're welcome.